games. So just to give general context to the panel, the reason we're really kind of saying this is the new normal in a state of the union is, as you can see with the collective experience here, the market has changed quite a bit since the advent of freemium in mobile. And so the themes that we were talking about were basically there's 3 assumptions that we're making in terms of what this new environment looks like. And it's one, it's around the theme of things being crowded, right? So from a consumer level, consumers' first phones are crowded, right? So you look at the recode, the recent recode story that just basically said, hey, consumers have gotten to a point where they've downloaded what they're going to download, and there's very little room for any new apps coming on the market to fight for share of that device space, unless you're a Snapchat or an Uber, right? That was the premise they were making. Second is that the charts are crowded, right? So crowded meaning that there's a high concentration and consolidation in scale and infrastructure in the top grossing charts, right? So those spots seem to be pretty fixed with limited ability to move up and down. So then that comes to saying, okay, how are you monetizing? So what does that look like for you in terms of building on an overall monetization strategy? And then third, what we're saying is your games are crowded, right? So SDK footprint, SDK fatigue has become even a bigger piece of this as sophistication and infrastructure become better and better from an app development standpoint, while the platforms like a Google, a consistent theme that we hear is DEX counts, right? And how do I survive around DEX counts? So those are the 3 themes that we're going to really kind of dive into here that as a collective we feel like makes up the new normal and kind of what the environment that each of these guys are navigating on an everyday basis. So I'm going to start really kind of with the tip of the spear, and if you're talking about how to make successful games, it probably all starts with users, right? And so, the Recode article that we cited, it's, hey, consumers' phones are crowded. It's really hard to get users now. So, Kenneth and Bryan, I was going to kind of turn this over to you because you see both sides of the coin, both monetization and user acquisition. Do you agree with that? Is it harder to get users, and if so, how are you navigating around that?
Well, I think harder, maybe not so much. More expensive, absolutely yes. I think that's really the key there, and for us, obviously, and I'm sure it goes with everyone here. Is everyone's seeing the rising cost of the install, and really it's the never-ending chase to optimize, find those good users, and spend wisely. So you're spending profitably. I think that's the tough part, and I think everyone can agree that's the roadblock we all face and try to hurdle over.
So from our point of view, we definitely see a lot of change, and it affected our company philosophy as well, in a sense that we used to just develop games very quickly, try to get a game out within like 2 months span, and then see if it sticks, right? But now with the UA cost being so high, we have to think twice as to we can't spend like 6-digit or 7-digit marketing budget and then have a game that just totally flop. So we're doing a more thorough internal review process to make sure we have the right game to talking to the right audience, have the right KPI before we even ready to go to soft launch. And we've been killing a lot of games left and right, and instead of having like 6 games a year, we just launched like 2 games in the last 2 years. So I think that's definitely the change in terms of the industry for sure.
So I want to go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I get it's also why we moved into working closer with our brand partners. We try to find brands that will also bring a lot of users to our games. So when you see our games like PBA Bowling Challenge, we do a ton with them. They do a ton for us. It's a really, really good synergy. So when we look at making a new game, we tend to look for good partners to help us out with that side. So you'll see like the PBA has commercials during every PBA event on Sunday. We have our own team. They just they really see the value too of not just the revenue, but they also want to bring in that new younger crowd users to watch. And in our new games this year were Rapala Fishing and Arctic Cat Snowmobile Racing, and both of those brands we brought those in for the same reason. We really thought we were going to have a good synergy with them, and that they promised to bring a lot to the table with bringing all their users, all the Rapala fishing fans in the world, and all the Arctic Cat Snowmobile fans.
Got it. So I'm going to put a pin in that because that's certainly the licensing piece is something that we want to get to. But continuing on something that Kenneth said, I think you talked about life cycle of the game, right? And the shots on goal are certainly decreasing, and this kind of contributes to the charts being crowded, right? And so I look at Adam, and I look at Bryan, and I look at Keith, and I look at Kenneth, and I'm thinking dice with buddies, right? And I'm thinking My Singing Monsters, I'm thinking Kill Shot, and even before that, Big Win. I'm thinking PBA bowling, right? So obviously life cycles have gone longer and longer in terms of how you're supporting and sustaining a game. So live operations is really key to that. But so Adam, I'll kind of talk to you because you wear the product manager hat as well as monetization. And so when you guys are thinking about games and sustaining and kind of balancing what's happening with something like a dice or a Yahtzees with buddies, like how are you guys evaluating how you bring users in and what you're doing with those users on a daily basis, given the longevity of the titles that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of, I mean, it makes sense to talk a little bit about what we at Scopely kind of focus on, and it's a kind of a combination of what Keith and Kenneth both said, which is that it's really about focus, that we focus on specific titles, specific brands, and then really look to leverage those over time. And so we're looking to specifically go after users that are going to appeal to those brands and find new and unique ways to bring them in and to keep them there once they're there. And sort of, so we're very focused on how do we find those users, and those users are then very specific to us. So what we know, what Yahtzee users we want to keep, we know what Walking Dead users are and what they do, and so it's very much a focus on how do we do things that can leverage those, and it often goes across both. Like we really do focus across even other brands. We had a sponsorship with Lyft where we were driving downloads by being integrated within Lyft's app, and so it's like we're very focused on the advertising side on my team, but we're very much looking to leverage those with the assumption that we're going to be operating with a lot of those different brands and those same users over a longer period of time.
So is it fair to say that everything that all of you guys do is basically data-driven, right? So anything you do, whatever the secret sauce is, it all ties back to a number and probably a device ID, right, at this point. Okay, so if we kind of continue the conversation and go back to where Keith was on this, so I think licensing has been kind of probably like the mainstream answer and silver bullet to user acquisition costs, right? And obviously you're seeing that take a very mature focus as well, because more and more people are going after the IP with that thought in mind. The question is licensing really a strategy for longevity? Is it to offset UA costs? I mean, what success have you guys had or hadn't had with licensing? And so Keith, I'll come back to you, but I was gonna ask Bryan on that because I know you've done a lot with the Muppets and you've tried a few different things, but yet you've got My Singing Monsters, which is kind of your flagship IP, which is homegrown. So how are you balancing?
Yeah, that is a tough one because I think for us, we've always focused on trying to create original IP. Obviously, we did a collaboration with Disney, using My Singing Monsters as a model to create My Muppet Show. Yeah, obviously, that didn't see the success that My Singing Monsters had as an original IP. And there's a whole lot of theories on why I won't get into right now, but I think when you look at licensing an IP, you've really as you mentioned for the PBA, I think you really need to kind of look at the balance between what the IP is bringing you, what are the costs associated with that, against it's rather than growing original IP from scratch, and it is a very, very scary process to say, you know what, forget the license, let's create something from nothing, and go from there. It is definitely a safer route to say, let's do a Walking Dead game, let's do PBA bowling, let's work with Disney, right? So it's definitely I guess it really kind of goes back to what are your goals and where does that cost benefit is really on the license.
Yeah, again, I think it's really important it's certainly a core part of our strategy right now, to find the right brand partner. We've had brand partners in the past where they were big deals and the brand partner really just threw out their brand and expected that to be their part of the deal. And that's just not enough, and at least in our case. Right. So we really looked hard before we sign a contract, before we make that next game, to know that they're going to do a lot in user acquisition, retention, because usually those brand partners have access to the users that are really going to enjoy our games. So even like right now with Rapala, they have a whole bunch of fishing shows that they advertise in, and they show our game off, and like it's a ton of commercials as well. And you just see those are the users that really stick to the game. Or like PBA, it's amazing how many bowling fans there are out there. Right. And I mean, there's a lot, and they get a hold of us, and they play the games, and they're creating their own tournaments, and they're fantastic. But it's, again, it was having that great brand partner to have access to these users and that are excited about bringing them into the game. Another thing, I think it's important then to get them to be a part of the game early. So maybe some of the mistakes we've made in the past has been we just kind of made the game, put their brand on it, and said, "Yep, here you go, here's your game." And when they're involved and they see the game being built, they get really excited about it. And then you can start kind of building up the release plan with them, the marketing plans, and get them more involved early.
Well, so.
No, I'm just going to say that actually is a good point to look at the right brand for your needs. To go after something that's over-licensed, overexposed, obviously it can be a dangerous situation, but you've got a very niche focus, and I think that's a great approach, actually.
Right, so if all that being said, if the assumption is for each of the studios represented up here, the goal is to make revenue and make money, right? And so you start with the users, and so I think what hasn't changed probably in our lines of thinking is probably cost of acquisition has to be lower than lifetime value of your user when it's all said and done, and it's always got to back out, right? That's what defines what you can invest and what you can reinvest in terms of growing the game. So if we all agree that equation is still a relevant equation, whether you're licensing or not, then I think what I'm opening up to the group, because obviously you guys have all done an incredible job of balancing top grossing apps from an IAP standpoint, but also bringing in alternative monetization, mainly through advertising into your games. So, how has that look changed and evolved over time? And I'll go with you, Kenneth, because I think we're going from big win to kill shot to future titles. Like, you're in charge of balancing that for the studios and for the company. So, what's been the overall kind of perspective as kind of the market has evolved?
My perspective is that as the market got evolved, it's the constant battle is still within the office, and it doesn't end between product and marketing. And my designer is not here anymore, so I can freely speak my mind up. So it's always come down to resource, and I think advertising from it's almost like an afterthought, and for our studio, because they come from console and they are good at building AAA titles and AAA user experience, they always think that ads is intrusive. And I think it's about education. And I think that you can see a lot more people are putting their thoughts into integrating ads into the game rather than just, okay, put an SDK in, have a button here you go, and just wipe their hands out. And those model doesn't work anymore, and it's too old. And the one thing that all of you probably heard of it is, why put a button in the IAP store? If your grinder would never go to the IAP store, so never ever put a free reward button in the IAP store. That's just gonna ruin everything. So that's kind of mentality needs to change, and it's changed from the top up, top down, essentially. And we're now putting more effort into working with the designers. How do you incorporate reward as a avenue to progress in the game? I think that's the biggest. They have to make it reward advertising part of the game, so to speak. So I think that's kind of evolving over time.
So I'm gonna continue down that theme and kind of go to Adam, right? So Adam, with Scopely, I think you guys have always been on the forefront of experimentation and alternative monetization, all the way to kind of creating your own infrastructure, right? So wanted to kind of turn it over to you and kind of get a feeling of, since that's what you live every day with, both first party and published studios that you work with, how do you guys approach it across your portfolio?
Yeah, it's really an extension of what Kenneth was saying. It's like, I think that you can, I think that you can approach it as a battle, but I really look at it as like a partnership that nobody's going to. We could, let's put it this way, and I joke with our teams about this all the time. Like we could have a lot of advertising available if we just had an ad that rotated every 5 seconds, and that was our app, but nobody would play it. So that would be one extreme, and we want to take it to that we have a great product that is going to continue to draw users, and everybody's goals are aligned to that. So how do we do that in a way that balances it all and makes it a great user experience for everybody? And then it turns into like a push and pull of like like we have a team that doesn't want it and sees it as bad versus our team that wants it and thinks that it's going to drive a lot of monetization, and instead becomes a more cohesive effort where everyone is contributing and saying, to that same goal, and I truly believe in it for the points that we were talking about earlier, which is if our products are going to be something that we need to focus on in the long term, then there is no sort of like short-term window where we can do something that's bad. Any sort of negative product impact would be detrimental over like a long lifespan. So everything that we do needs to be considered from an LTV perspective, which is our approach overall.
So would you say, and I'll open this to the group, that the main points of discussion within the studios is mainly around the right user? How are you segmenting those users? How are you doing this smart? So at Tapjoy, I think we, and this is personal plug, so let's put it out there. So I mean, we kind of talk about it in a very basic way, in saying this is our iceberg theory, right? So everything you see above the waterline is probably your IAP spenders that people really care about, but that really represents 2 to 5% of the real estate. If you submerge, there's this giant glacier that goes under there, and it's what are you doing with that glacier? And our whole hypothesis is you can do a lot with that if you do it the right way and really understand user behavior in order to give that right experience. So that's been what we've been operating under. So I kind of want to turn it over to you guys. Is that right? Is that the dialogue you're having internally? It's like, let's use the data to prove this out. Bryan?
Yeah, absolutely. So even for us, for our games, we're constantly analyzing user behavior. Are they payers, non-payers? How fast or slow are they progressing through the game? Are they dropping off at a certain point? If they're non-payers and they're highly engaged, then we start looking at, okay, we know these, we can get the average right. So if we know someone's made it to a certain point of the game, whether that's 10% in or whatever that metric may be, then we can pretty much assess at this point if they're still playing the game and they haven't made any app purchase, they're most likely not going to be a payer. And then that's when we start looking at user engaged ads, whether that's rewarded, whether that's offer wall, and really kind of see how we can monetize off those users, because obviously they're engaged, they love the game, but they're not going to spend.
Right. So it sounds like there's always a push and pull internally, and so somebody's got to break the tie. So Keith, you're the CEO. So how do you break the tie internally, or is it even a push and pull within Concrete?
Yeah, it is. Well, especially since when we first started putting ads in our games, they were interstitial and they were very intrusive, and you play the game and after 5 minutes you have a big ad pop up and you lose half your users, and to today now we have these engaging ads that where users are engaging with the ads themselves to get something for whatever reason. They're so much better today, and the formats are so much better that it's overall it's a much better experience for users. It doesn't really necessarily have to come down to just my decision, since analytics kind of show what's working, what doesn't. When you have really good engaging ads to, let's say in like PBA bowling, to you watch an ad so that you can continue playing because you ran out of energy. We find that users are actually even more engaged after that. So you get the analytics and we're like, oh, that's fantastic. Let's find more places like this. So it's more about the data.
Got it. And speaking of data, so we kind of, in preparation for this, we're trying to pull some data points from our own network and our own platform. And so we were just looking at casual games, right? So because video seems to be the format of choice, and there's a lot of opportunities to deliver a high quality experience in casual games, and we were looking kind of over a time frame and age of a casual game, and kind of the overall proportion of revenue contribution that comes from IAP and what comes from ads over time, right? To get your ultimate like holistic LTV. And we've actually seen basically the proportion coming from ad revenue range generally on average between 20 to 35%, but in some real significant cases up to 40, 45%. So going back to like starting from the beginning and not putting it putting ads later on as a bolt-on and putting the user experience first, you know, throw it out to Adam. I mean, do you guys have a specific goal going into games when you're looking at the GDD and kind of scoping it out saying, hey, we feel like this is a 20% contributor. We feel like this is 30. This is what we'd like to see long-term from our split?
Yeah, yes, we do. I mean, and again, we go back to, like, I think that we're actually trying to sort of move our thinking about it like even deeper. So like when we say a split, like a straight revenue split, like it would imply that I think that what we're trying to do more so now is we're trying to move to again, I mentioned it earlier, but our LTV model, which like if you're somebody who you're going to spend a little bit in our app and then you're going to stay with it for a long time, we still want to be able to monetize you in other ways. Like we want you to be a user long term, and we look at them all as tools for monetization. So when looking at at the split of revenue, we want to make it even more complex on ourselves than that and say, okay, so are we monetizing you right for your time in your life cycle with our product? So if you want to maybe try out rewarded video up front and you're gonna monetize that way, and then you're gonna extend your engagement, you're gonna start to spend, then we don't want to look at one or the other. We want to look at you across your entire lifespan and say, are we monetizing you correctly? So it's again actually moving away from a focus on like how much revenue are we driving from ads, how much revenue are we driving from IAP, and a focus on the user and is the product sort of maximizing all those opportunities for us.
Got it. Kenneth, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So yeah, I totally agree, and we don't really look at it in a holistic kind of view because I think it could be very skewed because it all depends on how big your IAP is, right? If you're like a top 10 grossing game, it's almost impossible to have like 20% of ad revenue to be in that range to generate that. We look at more like app DAU and more like engagement. So how many people actually voluntarily engage in ads, and what is the retention after, what is the conversion rate after? And most of the time we do see that people do use reward advertising as a bridge between willing to commit to your game than actually converting in your game and actually sustain through a life cycle. And then the next part is, how do we, as they progress in the game, how do we treat them? Do we give them more as they go along? I think that's the big question that it could be different for all the other games because every game play a little bit differently. But that's, I guess, will be the next struggle that we have to answer. As do we progressively give more because people need more currency?
So it sounds like, just to kind of recap, so we talked about, okay, first it starts with acquiring users, right? And making sure that that number backs out by the way you're monetizing these users for the long term, right? So the iceberg theory. Then, I think the next step is saying, okay, in this space, clearly having scale is an advantage. Having infrastructure is a real advantage because then you can take learnings and take a data-driven approach to do something with that scale, right? And so kind of looking at that, clearly all the decisions you're making are data-driven, and you're now balancing a ton of data sets, right? I think have your kids be a data scientist, right? Like that's kind of the future of everything. So then when you talk about infrastructure, right? So the way I've always kind of thought about it is just kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts for you guys, because it's like, okay, I've got this limited capacity in my app to put either homegrown infrastructure or third-party infrastructure. So, and it becomes ambiguous on how those decisions are made. You just know that you've got a limit. There's a finite amount that's capped. So, I mean, what are you guys doing in terms of evaluating that piece, right? Because once you have the scale, you got to get the data, but then you got to take action. So, like, what is that balance for each of you? And I think I'll start with you, Keith.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's not an exact science for us, but we try to always look at the ROI. And it's not easy to always balance, especially when you're looking at something, you're adding, let's say, another advertising network where you can pretty much easily say, you know, okay, I think we can add this SDK in, as this will help out this much, versus putting in something like Immersion's haptic feedback, you know, where we're like, how's that going to really go and help us out in the long run? Is it going to make a better user experience? Is it going to make a better partner with them to bring in more users? And it's a lot of arguing and, you know, and trying to figure out what's going to help the most. And it's also just evaluating each game by game. You'll have PBA bowling does the best for us. We have the most users coming through there, so we serve the most ads through that game. So we tend to have more ad networks in that game as well, because it's very easy to see what's missing there.
Right. But even besides ad networks, I'm just talking about the overall footprint, right? And so I think there's been a movement where a lot of solutions in the market are trying to consolidate functions together in order to make it easier for app developers to avoid kind of running into any
DEX
index counts and also like cost, right? So it can be technical overhead, it could be opportunity cost, it could be financial overhead. And so I don't know, Adam, I'll kind of go back to you and Bryan on this one. But Adam, I'll start with you. I mean, I think Scopely does a lot in terms of testing and using and growing. So you know, how does that work? You know, in terms of your decision tree.
Yeah, it is a complicated situation for us because we really do have a lot of options of, well, maybe even taking a step back from that, we have a lot of ad products in our games. So we want a lot of different solutions, and because of that, there's a lot of different partners to evaluate across all of those products, and then you sort of have to cherry pick, okay, well, I want to work with this partner on this, they seem really strong in this area, I want to work with this partner on this, and that creates this whole web of complication that we truly do want to, the message that comes back from our platform team is like, this is complex and we want simplicity we like. So all of that in terms of our decision making is exactly what you said. We have to weigh we have to weigh those different opportunities and sort of ask ourselves, are we working with the best, are we working to create the best in class solutions? Are there additional ways that we can leverage the tools for everybody who we choose to work with? And then I do think it really goes to a partnership approach, which is that like we want all of our partners to grow, and we want to be a good partner for them so that we can leverage all of those things across all of those different ad products. And that is really key because we are limited, we can't work with everyone. We want to make sure that we're getting every last drop of value out of everybody who we do choose to work with. And so we want to help them be successful. We want to pick partners that we think are going to be successful, and then grow those relationships over time and see the fruits of all of that.
Bryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, he pretty much nailed it at that point. It really is exactly what Adam said in terms of the right partners for the right product and right placement. And yeah, I mean, essentially our decision-making process is very, very similar, actually.
Right. So, Keith, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, we've been, we try to work with really key partners. In the past, we've gotten to the point where we have worked with too many, and it's hard to keep up and have those good relationships and make sure you're doing the right with that partner as well. So we tend to have, like Tapjoy, Google, Apple, and just tend to work closely with those partners. And whenever we can, we try to stay with a few really, really good key partners.
Right. Kenneth, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the other three pretty much said everything that I could say. I think that you have to understand the marketplace is always changing. You do want to build a long relationship, but at the same time, you always want to talk to your peers. And that's why you want to be friends with these people here. And just know what's going on. Like, you don't want to be left out in the dark. And I think that's always important. And, continue to have, not just put an SDK and not forget about it. You have to talk to your account manager ask them what's happening, what's it coming down the pipeline, and then evaluate, essentially. If something is not working for you, try to find out why. Yeah.
So do you guys all see a world in which, so I think the keynote today was kind of Chris DeWolf from SGN talking about consolidation, right? Just consolidation in this market. Do you also see it on the infrastructure side where fewer players will exist and consolidation will not just be about specific business units or business purposes, but consolidation being, hey, partners and relationships that now bring multiple facets to the table that can then, and I'm making the assumption that it's really hard to make a bunch of different SDKs talk to each other, that can now combine those functions so you can essentially optimize a value chain, which starts with acquiring the user, segmenting that user, deciding what to do with it, and then having a delivery method, whether it's in-app messaging, whether it's ads, or whether, like, do you see that a world where that all starts coming together, or I mean, what are your viewpoints on that?
It's already happening, actually. I mean, if you look at a lot of the ad networks out there and the service available, it's mediation obviously is a huge word these days, and obviously you're seeing. It's from a developer and a publisher standpoint, it's great to be able to say what one SDK, right? So you don't get executable bloat. It's really nice to be able to get quality ads at great eCPMs and high fill rates. I think those can't ask for more than that.
And I think that was key what you said too is, when you work with a company that does multiple things, they're going to make sure everything works well together. And so, otherwise, there's so many times when you're trying to make company A and company B all work well together, and we shouldn't have to do that, or we don't want to do that. We'd rather work with somebody who can, make sure that everything's working smoothly in all across our infrastructure, to be honest.
Got it.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I really agree with that. The we all want to be pulling in the same direction. I mean, it's the same with the game teams. Like, we don't want to be pushing on our partners to build things specifically for us, or, well, we do, but we want those things to be aligned, because like, we may be doing something weird. We want something that everybody can leverage, because then it's going to continue to get better without us sort of prompting it. Like, we want that sort of natural cycle of improvement to be happening across the board with everybody.
So we're 40 minutes into this, and we got to 40 minutes without mentioning Pokemon, right? So, but I'd be remiss not to bring that in. And the reason, I'll tie it to the theme. We're talking about the new normal here, and then you get a kind of a watershed moment. We can debate that of AR plus mapping kind of coming into focus using the mobile device and not a headset, right? So if we're talking about the new normal, what's the next step? I mean, what are you guys' thoughts? I mean, you guys have been in this space for a long time. Like, is this a watershed moment? Is augmented reality something that we should be thinking about, building for, taking notice of? I'll start with you, Bryan, because my Mammoth was probably the first AR game I ever saw. And I think you guys were doing that 2 to 3 years ago. So start with you.
Yeah, I think the whole AR, VR, it's interesting, right? I mean, I think it's still very early on. Since you brought up Pokemon, I think they did it right. It's the AR and the whole the whole location-based system of the game works extremely well with that license. And I think that's the combination that you have to look for. You don't want to do AR just because. If it doesn't fit, I mean, if it's a poor game design, it's going to be a poor experience. We did experiment. We had a couple of derivative titles, My Mammoth and My Pom Pom, based off the characters in My Singing Monsters using AR, and it was great. It allowed kids to be able to interact with the characters within their home or in the backyard or whatever it may be. And we use it really more for a marketing tool than a game to drive revenue. But I think, again, it's without a proper integration into gameplay and really thorough design, then it's just a gimmick that it probably will fizzle out very fast. So.
Any other thoughts?
I know for Concrete Software, we're not a large company. We're about 30 people right now, and I'm really excited about VR, and certainly Pokemon's done fantastic with AR. But being the size company we are, we want to wait and see more examples of AR do very well before we jump in that sort of area. In VR, I mean, there's so much money going to VR. Excited about seeing where it goes, but we are certainly going to step back and wait a little bit until we see more VR, a good example of like a great VR game that's out there that does very well before we jump in.
Yeah, that's kind of the same approach that we see. We definitely investigate the option of VR, but we, as a company, determined that now is not the right time. I think there's still a lot of room to grow in that particular space. And you could argue Pokemon if it's really AR or it's just a geolocation game. We don't think AR, we kind of hard to adopt AR, but we do definitely see a lot of opportunity in geolocation-based type of game, treasure game, treasure hunt or scavenger hunt kind of game. We definitely will see something happen in the next 6 to 12 months for sure.
Got it. Well, and just to go back to the theme, well, one of the themes is I do think it's a great marriage of license and product. Because Niantic's first title was very similar, and you add Pokemon and it really does add a great element, and I think it's a good example of those working very well together and really supporting each other to create something stronger than,
Another Kim Kardashian moment. Right? it's Kim Kardashian was the A-list, right? And then it got mixed together. Okay, so last piece of before we open it up to Q&A, I think the last part of this title is how to win, right? So if we've established that there is a new normal based upon everything that was shared up here, kind of like to kind of turn it over to the panelists and say, like, if you had words of wisdom or advice to the crowd on how to win within this space, any collective wisdom you guys would be willing to share, I'm sure would go a long way with the crowd. So Keith, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, absolutely. I think the reason we've been around for 13 years, I think, is just being very, very nimble and being always ready to evaluate the next thing and being willing to kill off maybe what we have already or what we've been working on. We started back in the day working on feature phones. Obviously we've moved a long way since then, and moved to many other platforms in between. And we're always willing to look forward and always reevaluate and not just be married with our idea. Just because we're making a game today on BlackBerry doesn't mean it's going to be here in 2 years from now. And that's the same thing as well in even in what we build internally. We've built almost everything ourselves, and have come to points where the team loves it, we built it, but maybe it's not right since we're a game company of 30 people that we should be actually building that. So we're always looking to see if it's time to move on and move on to maybe someone else who's built something better for us. And it can be really, really hard to do, especially if you've built the product.
I guess in order to know how to win, you need to know how to fail. So I think we learned that you have to learn the hard way. But when you fail, you better know why you fail. So I think that's one of the things that, lucky for us, we were able to use analytic and data to find out why we're failing on some of the title we released, and then try to align to what we're good at. So at the end of the day, we were able to have a couple of successful titles. I think that's the key point. Don't use your heart, because when you create a game, you always feel passionate. It's like, oh, I'm sure it's gonna work. When we soft launch a game, if we make one change, it's gonna make it different. And then like 18 months later, and you're still stuck. So I think that's the one thing that I could pass on, and we experienced that, and I hope none of you have to experience that again.
I would have to say it's a combination of a few things. So obviously core game design is absolutely critical. If the game's not fun, it doesn't matter what you do to it, people are going to come back. And that kind of leads to retention, right? As long as the people are coming back, you're going to be able to monetize. Maybe not today, you could keep tuning, but if people are engaged in playing your game, obviously you're going to win. And actually, you said it best earlier, data-driven decision, absolutely critical. Know what your users are doing, know when are they monetizing, how are they monetizing, what they're worth, how you're spending. Everything boils down to the numbers and being able to interpret what's going on in the game and making decisions based off of that. And again, I mean, it'll be easy to know if you're headed in the right direction or failure is imminent. So.
Yeah, I would characterize it as focus and partnerships. Like it's a focus on making big bets, and we do that with our licenses. We do that with our ad products and our implementations, and really focus on like these are the things that we want to do and drive through all of our titles, and that goes across every org and certainly like within my team. And then on partnerships, it's both partnerships with all of our third-party partners and our internal partners. It's about working with our game teams to make sure that we're all aligned on our mission and making a great product, and then also sort of executing on that product down the line. Like once it's implemented, making sure that we're driving the maximum amount of value from that. So I would say that just focusing and making those big bets and then driving them home.
Yeah.
There we go. So it kind of sounds like there's a trifecta when you're looking at making a new experience. You guys are talking about finding the right audience and the right brand fit for that audience, and also having the right brand and user experience, all kind of meshing together. Where do you guys start when you're looking at starting a new project? Which of those places do you start with? Do you start with your audience? Do you start with your brand? Do you start with the experience? And Hothead, I know you're talking specifically about like how you have a process for analyzing those. I was just curious what that was.
So we go through a few phases within the company. So initially we have a concept stage. So we think about what kind of games we want to do. So our company right now is focusing on shooting. So how many different ways you can have a shooting game, and apparently there's a lot. So we have like 4 different titles, all 4 different techniques going in. So once you establish that, and then becomes like prototype. Internally, if we don't even like it to play, it's most likely not going to go through. So we have like 5 different stages, basically just step by step. People playing it, and then we open to like our friends and family, and then we open up to a small group of engaged users that from our previous game that like our product, and basically we talk to them and say, hey, what do you think of this? And then before everything, if it passes through, then we might get to soft launch. And in terms of audience, you should know that what you're designing, then you would know, and then I would say that find what kind of game you want to design. Then you know your audience, then you find your partner. Don't have a partner and then try to design a game. I don't think that rarely works.
So you're saying kind of your target audience starts with you and what you want to experience first.
Yeah, I think you have to know what you're good at.
Gotcha.
Like we are not good at doing a fashion game. And none of the people have any fashion sense in the office. And so.
Got it. We love your hat, by the way.
So it's interesting. We've done both. We've started with the experience, and we've also started with the brands. And brands are really, we look at them as being really, really key partners. So I wouldn't say we just take any brand, but we actually start with brand first. And we go out and, we've had many sports games, so it was pretty easy for us to go to Rapala, and they fit really well with us. That being said, our studio director had already made like 3 fishing games, so that helped too. So it was mostly brand finding that right partner, but it was also knowing that it was a game that fit us well. We've tried many different ways on figuring out what we're going to work on next, from internally having all ideas from the whole company to doing what we call apathons. We had little teams put together and try to make little games and try that out. We found that it's worked. We kind of like the apathon part, though lately, since we've been going more with finding the brand first, then we kind of drill down, and it certainly gets into the certain genre of type of game we're going to make. So for actually NHL Hockey Smash is probably a good example. We got the brand, we pitched them on doing a casual game, but we didn't have the game set. And so then we went in and we came up with, we brainstormed like crazy, the entire company, and started going through an agile process of building out different types of games. And quickly shot down a lot of games. It's funny, the whole idea of the game first came up where we were looking at different sports games, and we were looking at like baseball, for example, where it was like, do people really want to play a full baseball game on their mobile phone? It seems like people want to do home run derby. So we looked at hockey and said, let's do the same thing. Right. So what do people want to do in hockey? We figured people want to do shootouts and fight. Nice, easy, right? And of course we worked with the NHL, and fighting is probably not their favorite thing to put in a game. And so then we went and kind of figured out, we tried to do a shootout, and we quickly killed that. We just didn't like the interface and the way it played. Moving down the ice side to side and shooting, you're accidentally shooting halfway down the ice. And we slowly got into like a sort of a skills competition type of game. But it was a lot of iterative process of trying to build something quick, test it out, and we really were similar to like what Kenneth was saying, where we try internally first, and then we kind of move out to a little bit bigger group, and then finally do a soft launch, and hopefully figure out a way that makes it fun and get to a full launch.
And one of the things I just noticed in just kind of looking down this is that I think obviously personal beliefs and inspiration drive a lot of creativity, but I was also just kind of like looking at location, right? So when we kind of talk about all this, I think we get a very Silicon Valley mindset, right? And I look down here and I'm seeing Minnesota, Western Canada, Eastern Canada, LA, and I remember when Scopely was Walter and Eric and like a golf game, right? And they're like, hey, we're gonna do these big things, and it was like, okay. And so I think if you guys can take from these guys is from any inspiration is like, doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter necessarily where you're located, but literally it seems like it's the passion and then the data, but probably passion first in terms of what's driving this. And I mean, you guys have all been in this space for 6-7 years, and you can continue to do it. So if you guys take any cues from these guys, I think it's a pretty inspiring group up here. So
I'll start with that. So in terms of trends, I think My Singing Monster is a great example. We're for a long time, I think we kind of set the monetization model and it kind of just set it, forget it, kind of a ideology, and obviously over time, ad revenue kept increasing from single digits to double digits, not quite 50%, but it's very healthy. And then so we start looking, okay, we're seeing these increases, and we weren't necessarily adding a whole lot of ad placements within the game. So for us, in terms of ARP down increase, I think it was fairly steady, but there's obviously, our goal isn't just to be like, okay, well, that's good enough, let's go home. It's how do we keep increasing that incrementally? How do we get a little bit higher? And whether that's looking at pricing, and not only just pricing, but what you're getting for that price. So is it, a 99-cent pack, $1.99, $5.99, et cetera, et cetera. Playing around with what we're offering for that price point. Looking at when things are offered within the game, whether that's a new monster, a new island, and trying to adjust that to see how that affects monetization and user behavior. For us too, so obviously My Sea Monsters is based around collectability, right? You want to collect all the monsters. Does that include, by seasonal monsters, rare monsters, and the frequency, as well as when they're introduced in the game and how they're introduced to the user? Is it purely in-game? Is it social media? Whatever it may be. And obviously, we did see incremental increases in ARPDAU, and maybe it's 1% here and 1% there. But if we're working on 30 different items, suddenly it's starting to look like a much brighter picture.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, we're always working on increasing ARPDAU, and it's an important KPI in our games. We've been slowly seeing it rise, and a lot of it is from advertising. We've found a lot of places where it makes a lot of sense to have incentivized ads from most of our games. If you go in them, they'll have like a daily spin where you can get some free currency for coming in every day. It's a retention metric. People watch videos. We make money that way as well. I mean, it works pretty well across our games. To that come for many games like Arctic Cat Snowmobile Racing, you run out of gas and you haven't crashed, you can watch a video to keep going. People love it, and those are things that we've kind of added. We've had a lot of those spots after the games have gone live. And so it's our advertising, for us at least, our advertising revenue has gone up. while our IAPs pretty much stay pretty steady for us, to be honest. And at the same time, our ad partners tend to be getting better ads. There's more branded ads. It seems like there's more money coming in from on the ad side, so that's also helping out quite a bit as well.
Yeah, just a little bit more on that. Like, definitely see a lot of opportunity with rewarded video. And I think it's because it's a great experience all around. You get like users who want to engage with it to drive their engagement with the game. The advertiser gets a great experience because not only do they get, you know, completed views, but the user has a genuinely good feeling about, like, I engaged with this ad, which for an advertiser makes a lot of sense, like why you would want to drive units like that. So I think as there's an increased awareness about that ad unit, and it increases its prominence, like, hope that there's a lot of upside there.
So I think on the app DAO side, we definitely see a trend going up, and the way we approach it is we actually try to be more sophisticated to understand how to improve the app DAO at the sense that for day one retention, so our day one retention, how much can we move? Day 3, how much can we move? Day 7, how much can we move? And then not only conversion, we now look at a remonetization and what's go before and after. If someone watches an ad, then convert, do they do better? Or do they convert best and then watch an ad and then do they do better? And then try to find the right mix and then try to build some feature around that. So I think that's, you know, when to show an ad or what you should offer. I think that's essentially lead us to a higher ground.
Well, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys for sharing your knowledge. Appreciate it.